Have you ever felt like you lost your direction? I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and thanks for listening to the Parable Podcast. We are in the midst of collaborating with the Baton Pass as they kick off their spring event season called Illuminate When Light Reveals. I happen to be one of their advisors, and I truly love this team and what this organization is all about. If you haven't heard of the Baton Pass before, they exist to empower women to overcome through the use of stories. So I'm thrilled for us to hear another parable story from Anna, who shares her own story of loss and God's hand on her life.
And I just think it's just be sensitive to your healing walk. Don't compare to anyone else. Allow yourself time and give yourself grace, because there's no right or wrong way to grieve. When you feel like, okay, I'm ready to turn the page, I think the Spirit is going to let you feel that.
Here's my conversation with Ana Rivera Muñoz. Well, I met Anna last fall, I think, maybe spring. It all just kind of mumbles all together. So, Anna, thank you so much for being on the Parable Podcast. Grateful to have you join me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, Anna, I would love to know, what is something that really fuels your soul? Because we can really just go day to day and just kind of forget about the things that really help us, lift us up. So what would be something like that for you?
In this season, as I am wrapping up my last few weeks of grad school and finishing up my internship, I find that just being with my family, my boys who are both in college, I have a senior in college, a freshman in college, just whenever we get the opportunity to be together, whether that's playing a board game or just having conversations around a dinner table or watching a TV show together, that has been what is fueling my soul in this season. Mm-hmm. Time with them is just, it's precious. Who knows where tomorrow we will all be. I don't take that for granted. And anytime I have those opportunities, I feel my cup is filled to the brim.
You said you have a freshman and a senior in college, and you're in grad school.
It's been a crazy season.
Okay, so what are you getting your graduate degree in?
I am getting my degree in marriage and family therapy.
Okay. Is that therapy kind of just like been a trajectory that has been an interest to you, or has that come later in life?
You know what? It came later in life. Both my late husband and I, along with my new husband, I've done therapy with both of them, in different seasons of our life. Mm-hmm. I've seen the benefits. I've received the benefits from having good Christian therapy poured into my life. And it wasn't until maybe about 5 years ago when the Lord just spoke into my life as I was seeking direction. What next? Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, raised my family, check, done this, check, what next for Anna? And when the Lord kind of just poured that in, I was like, wow. Mm-hmm. And it took some time before he aligned everything. Yeah. But once I got here, I was like, wow, Lord, your timing is perfection. Everything. I had the opportunity to work at a private Christian practice in St. Charles. I feel like my clients just really, they blessed me more than I think I'm helping them. Yeah. I don't know if they know that. And this May, Josiah is my oldest, and I will be graduating on Mother's Day weekend together.
Oh my gosh. How fun is that?
Yeah, that setup that God did was perfection.
All right. Well, as you are getting through the end of graduate school, who would you say is the biggest person that just always shows up for you?
I would say my husband, Danielle. Daniel has been my biggest cheerleader in this season. I would say ever since we got married, he has truly been sensitive to my past, encouraging to all my dreams. I remember when he graduated 3 years ago from grad school, as soon as he came down from the stage and gave me a hug, he told me, now is your turn. And I was like, what? In the last 2 years, because the course that I've been on is a cohort style. Okay. So no breaks, even summers. I've been, through it. There's been difficult seasons where I'm just like, I'm going to give up. This is too hard for me. And he's like, you're not giving up. You're almost at the end. This is your calling. God has called you and is equipping you for this time in your life. Not that I wouldn't have done it without him, but man, he has been such an encourager.
I love that, Anna. We were talking a little bit about this before. Like when we're little, we kind of have dreams. Sometimes they could be silly. Sometimes they could be like, okay, envision this for my future. And the most of those dreams that like at least have come to fruition for me are they're not the same of what I expect. God has like just bigger and better plans. So do you have anything that you've dreamt of as a child that has come to fruition?
No, everything that I dreamt as a child has been so different as an adult. Yeah. But I'll tell you this, I am living in almost a childlike kind of dream. My husband and I started doing Disney as adults in the last 3 or 4 years. And let me tell you, that's the best thing ever. You feel like a kid again. When people ask, and I've had the opportunity to travel different places, different countries, but when people ask me what's one of my favorite trips, I always say Disney.
Yeah.
So I feel like a princess there. I enjoy it. I feel like a kid again. Yeah. So
just recently I was interviewing someone, but she had like the same thing where she was just like, I have found Disney as an adult. And I think that's the spirit of fun and like life and silliness and joy. I mean, who wouldn't want more of that in your life, right?
Yeah.
Well, we are doing this episode in collaboration with the Baton Pass. And if you have been around here for a bit, I love them. They're just a great organization, and it has enabled women to really share their stories, equip them and empower them to really overcome in such a powerful way that really brings hope, healing, and radical restoration. And Anna, you are a proof of that as well. Your story is really impactful. So I'm excited for you to share with us one of your parable stories today.
The parable story that I have chosen is the one of the lost sheep. And I've chosen this not because in that season of my life I have walked away from my faith, but because in that season I have felt the most lost and without direction. I had no plan for myself or for my children. My situation felt completely hopeless. And I felt like I had lost everything, including my identity, because for such a long time, my identity was tied to the title of being a pastor's wife. And in my mind, I felt as if I would no longer have the capacity to serve others the way I had in the past. And you would ask why? And my response is because on August 5th of 2014, my world was turned completely upside down when the Lord called my husband David into eternity. Mm-hmm. And so if you allow me to just share a little bit of my backstory of that, David and I met in children's ministry at a church in Chicago, and we were high school sweethearts and very much in love. And in November 1999, we got married. We said our vows before God and our friends and family, and we thought we were entering our happily ever after. We had so many big dreams ahead of us that we had planned. But 3 months into our marriage, David's body was stricken with bladder cancer. And for anyone that's familiar with that type of cancer, you know that that's not something typically found in a 21-year-old man. It's a type of cancer that's found more in elderly people. David went in through several rounds of chemo, where at the end of that, we're grateful that through the chemo and through the prayer of God's people, David's body was healed. But we also received the news that we would never have biological children. And it was devastating. Not being able to have children was not in our plans. We wanted a large family, actually. At this time, David and I were very busy. We were church planters. We were called into church planting, and we loved it. The Lord allowed us to have several ministries, both here in the United States and in South America. And although we were devastated with the news that we had received, we never gave up hope. We never stopped praying and trusted that God had a plan. We even started an adoption process. But 3 years after that, we were surprised when I was able to get pregnant. And in 2003, we welcomed into this world our first son, Josias. And then 3 years after that, we welcomed our second boy, Zacharias. And up to this point, I felt like my life was complete. And I felt like we were happy. We were steady. We were in firm foundation for sure. But in 2010, challenges resurfaced in David's health, and he started having a lot of cardiovascular issues. By this time, David was diagnosed with AVMs. And for those that are not familiar with that term, AVMs are abnormal tangles of the blood vessels that can cause problems with the connection between your arteries and your veins. And this disrupts the blood flow in your body. And it also put a lot of strain and pressure on the heart and the whole vascular system. What we did not know was that This was a congenital condition that David was born with, but we didn't find it until later in his life. So the next few years of David's life and our young family life, David had many surgeries. We traveled to the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, and we had an amazing team of doctors and physicians that were wonderful and walked this season with us. And the surgeries were all so that they could alleviate the pain and pressure that David was constantly feeling. But instead of getting better, David's condition worsened. So fast forward to June of 2014, David had to go into a routine visit. At this point, David was already experiencing seizures and blackouts. So his main surgeon was now the head chairman at Yale New Haven Hospital in Connecticut. And so we went out there in June and we met with the lead team of the physicians that were going to be operating on him for the next big surgery. Unfortunately, the news that we had received that day was not what we wanted. And they told us that David only had a 50-50 chance of survival. And so you can imagine the desperation that kind of set in. We felt as if the news that we received was heavy. It was definitely heavy. And David and I had to have several conversations leading up to the surgery. Our difficult conversations were those of what would I do in the event that David did die? How would I raise our children? We didn't have life insurance, so I had no plan on how I was going to be able to maintain our mortgage and everything. These were not our plans. So despair is definitely the word that I use here because it was all that I felt and all that I can remember. So August 5th comes around, and to this day, I still remember that morning very clearly. I remember the conversations that we had together with our boys, the exchanges of love and hugs and kisses and laughter and giggles. I remember my husband giving me his wedding ring and just saying goodbye. I just didn't think that was going to be the last time he was going to say goodbye. David went into surgery, and at 8 p.m. that same day, the Lord called him into eternity. I felt like I was sucker punched. For sure, my life would never be the same. I had to figure out what life was going to look like now without David. I didn't have a plan. We were supposed to grow old together. That was the plan. We were supposed to grow old together. But being a single mother was not in my plans. So you can imagine all these big emotions that I had. I became very bitter and angry with God. And I was very confused as to why he didn't answer my prayers the way I wanted him to. I felt completely hopeless and lost in this season. I had lost 25 pounds in the first month after his passing. I spent most of my days sleeping away my pain. The most difficult part of all that, I would say, was that not only did I mourn, but every time I mourned with my children as well when they would break down to cry. And if you're a parent, I'm sure that you can relate to me when I say that you feel utterly helpless when your child's heart is in pain and no longer can your kisses or your hugs take away that pain. I felt desperate for healing, and I became angry, and I questioned God, and I questioned, had the Lord abandoned me in my darkest season? I was a worshiper all my life, and in this season of my life, I could no longer open up my mouth to worship. I had felt like I had lost my worship. The hopelessness that I felt was so big that it consumed me. And in between the months of August and December of 2014, I lost my husband. My home and car were repossessed. I had to say goodbye to my church ministry that we had planted. I even said goodbye to friends, and I lost my identity. So when I say that my life was turned upside down, that is exactly how it felt. Everything that was tangible had been stripped away from me. But I'm so grateful that the Lord did not allow my story to end here, and that he had a plan and he had a purpose for my season of pain. It was just a matter of time before the plan was revealed.
Anna, thank you so much for sharing David with us and be able to hear a little bit about his story. I mean, it's just so beautiful that you guys met, 9 years old, children's ministry, and just to have that time with him. And obviously, you know, for you, it felt cut short. When you get married to someone, you believe that this is forever. And ultimately, you know, you get to see David in heaven, but you're like, you question all of these things like, well, what's going to happen now? Who's going to be able to watch our children grow up? Like, I'm going to have to do this alone. You know, you said a couple of times, you know, this was not our plan. And I think so many people can resonate with that when we go through something in life. You question, like, are you good? Like, why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. And while the story doesn't end here, how did God reveal and illuminate himself through this season of your life when you are just desperate and wondering what your identity is?
I call this next chapter my new beginning. It truly was. And it's so funny because that was the name of our church that we've had pastored, New Beginnings. I want to tie this up with the parable because just like the good shepherd, when a sheep is lost, he leaves the 99 and he goes out to go find that sheep. And when he finds that sheep, he heals their wounds, he binds them up, he puts them on their shoulder and he brings them back. And I felt like I saw Jesus do that for me. He became my good shepherd. He found me in my darkest season. He picked me up. He healed my wounds in a way that I had never experienced him do that for me before. And he carried me through that season. And in one of the most darkest times of my life, in my brokenness, in the midst of my despair, I witnessed the Lord step into my situation and into my dark place and transform it. And it didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen all at once, but gradually the Lord did show me that he actually was taking care of me and my two sons. And a lot of it happened through the body of Christ. One of the instructions that David had left for me and the boys was not to stay in our church ministry, to go find healing somewhere else. And out of obedience to his last wishes, I stepped away from our ministry and took my boys to one of our sister churches in Bloomingdale. And I thought that I was just going to sit there and I had no plan. I didn't even know what to expect. But the Lord had purpose for that move. And one day the Lord allowed me to share my story to the congregation, and an elderly couple was listening to it and were moved by it. And through that beautiful elderly couple, they provided for this poor widow and her two boys a safe place to live that we were able to call home for the next 3 years of my life. And not just that, but also a job, because I had not worked in several years because I was taking care of my family and ministry. And I saw the Lord show up and show out in my home during those next 3 years in ways that still to this day, when I think about it, leaves me in awe. And it reminds me of two beautiful verses that became super real to me in that season of my life. One is found in Psalm chapter 68, verse 5. And it says, "Father to the fatherless and protector of the widow is God in his holy dwelling." And that's who God became for us. He became a father to my boys, and he protected this poor widow and provided beautifully. And Psalm 37, verse 25 says, "I was young and now I'm old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging for bread." I've always heard of people testify of the goodness of God, that God is a great provider, that God heals and God does and all that. But just like in the book of Job, where at the end where he says, "My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you," that is what happened to me. I've always heard about the goodness of God, and I saw it when God healed David's body from cancer. I saw it in so many ways, but this became tangible to me on a whole nother level. He became my everything in this season.
Anna, you were a young wife, just little boys when this happened to you. It's easy for us to understand why you were shocked. You know, you could be angry and frustrated. What would be your encouragement to somebody just walking through this process? Because like you said, like I didn't feel like I could worship. I'm sure you felt like at times you couldn't even pray because you just feel overwhelmed and desperate. What would you say to the woman on the other side that feels like she's in that same space and what to do next?
Wow. We were young. I was just 33 years old when I lost my husband. Josiah was 11. Zach had just turned 8 years old. Something that I can encourage another woman with is when you can't see God's hands in the midst of your situation, look for his fingerprints because they're there. There's a verse that comes to mind that says, you will find me when you seek me with your whole heart. Sometimes we can't predict what the future holds, but God's already there. He's in our future. And if we trust him enough, he's going to carry us through it all. He's going to be with us in the mountaintop just the same way that he's with us in the valley.
Anna, I've had the pleasure of hearing your story through a Baton Pass event before and just chatting a little bit about what this process looks like here on the podcast. And just to know those fingerprints that you have talked about, like that has happened so many times in your life where you can look back and you're like, wow, like you were there, even though when it felt so hard. You know, when you were able to share your story at your church, I know for some of us, sometimes when we share our story, like, does this matter? Is this too sad? Is this too much? You know, but because you did that, a couple stepped in and was able to say, like, let me help you. And that's the beauty and the goodness of what God's doing, not in our lives, but in other people's lives, that we can come together and be supported as a community. Talk to me a little bit about when we share our story in community, what comes out of that?
You allow the body of Christ to truly be the hands and feet of Jesus. You allow the body to be able to truly come alongside and cry alongside you. And that takes being vulnerable and allowing people to come in to spaces that may seem uncomfortable. But I've learned that sometimes the Lord makes us uncomfortable so that he can set us up for bigger blessings.
That's really good. I like that because I think so many times it's really hard for us to ask for help, to share a story because we don't know how it's going to be reflected on the other side. And you don't know what you need to say in order for somebody to feel like they're utilizing their gifts, their talents, how they can be encouraged in a certain way and build that empathy for others. You know, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but, you know, when I thought of a widow, I thought of a gray-haired lady, you know, just in a rocking chair. And that whole picture has been blown out of my mind for the last couple of years because I met so many women that have lost their husbands at a young age. And like that verse says, like, how can we support and love the widow where they are? Now, I know your story doesn't even end there. Like, God's goodness has shown up. You know, talk to me a little bit about singleness and then who God brought into your life after.
Hallelujah. My story didn't end there. Truly. But I say that today, but truly when, you know, after I took a season to heal and when I felt that my heart was in a place where I felt healed enough, I made a prayer and I told the Lord one day, I don't even know where this came from, but I was like, Lord, I don't know what plans you have for me. If singleness is what you have, amen, I accept. And I'm going to trust that you're going to help me, you know, continue raising my boys. And I am going to trust that financially I'm going to also be well off. And then I said, what I always joke about this, what the most dangerous word you could ever say in a prayer. And I said, but, and in my mind, I always picture that when I said, but, Jesus was like, hold up, here I go. And I said, but Lord, if you have someone for me, I needed to bring them to my doorstep. And I was very specific about that because I met my first husband as a child. I had never dated outside of that. I didn't know what to think, you know, look for or anything. And what I did know was I didn't want to get it wrong. And I said, but if you have someone, you need to bring them here. So Daniel was part of our friend circle, and he was also part of our church plant ministry. Daniel also lived an hour and a half away from me. So when I said goodbye to my church ministry in December of 2014, I never thought I would see many of them, you know, or Daniel again, right? Yeah. And then one Sunday afternoon, while I'm in church, I see Daniel walking in the hallway and was completely taken by surprise. And I'm like, what are you doing here? you don't even live around here. And Daniel had shared that he had accepted the calling of being the youth pastor for that church. And along with that came him being able to live at the parsonage in the area as well with another male roommate. And Daniel went from living an hour and a half away from me to just 5 minutes away from me. But it wasn't until it was the right time that God allowed me to see Daniel with a new set of eyes. And 3 years after I had lost David, Daniel and I made our wedding vows before our sons and our friends and family and before God. And this September will be 8 years of marriage.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, Anna. I'm so excited for you. And just to see his goodness, you know, just not any random person, like someone your husband even knew, like how beautiful that is.
Yes.
You know, you mentioned before you started talking about Daniel, like you had taken some time to heal. Healing is a process. I think also healing and grief, like it's ongoing. You know, sometimes there's like those wounds or triggers that will come back, but you've learned how to decipher that. Can you speak a little bit about knowing when the healing process, not that has completely finished, but when it's like allowing yourself to just go out into the world and to share? And
you're absolutely right. And I'm actually, if I'm being completely honest, you always mourn. You will always mourn. It will be 11 years come this August since I lost David. And mourning looks different. When my youngest graduated high school, I was grateful for Daniel for being part of the journey and helping me continue to raise my children. But also there was sadness because David had missed out on so many things. And as we look into the future, my oldest, you know, having wedding plans for a few years from now, I hold both, you know, still grief, right? Because David won't be able to see that, won't be a part of that physically, but also rejoicing of, you know, wow, where the Lord has brought us to. And so healing looks different for sure for everyone. But for me, it was, I wanted to allow myself to process every season through my grief. I wanted to just kind of go through the physical seasons, right? And also just different, you know, I don't know if milestone would be the right word to use here, but just, it took me a complete year and a half. But I've known others that have been, you know, been able to heal much less time or just get through it differently. And others even longer time, right? So it's different for every person. And I just think it's just, be sensitive to your walk, your healing walk. Don't compare it to anyone else. Allow yourself time and give yourself grace because there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And I think that when the time is right, when you feel like, okay, I'm ready to turn the page, I think the Spirit is going to let you feel that. He'll line things for you. I really like that. You shouldn't compare because everyone's grief is different. I think that is also the danger of somebody hearing your story and be like, oh, I know what you've been through. I know not to say that anymore because I have not experienced it and my grief is not the same as yours. So thank you for sharing that wisdom and to know that it is ongoing to mourn and that is okay. Like a good majority of the Bible is about mourning. You know, I think that's easy to forget sometimes because we're like, oh, joyous Christian life. Like there is going to be hardship too. Anna, thank you so much for walking us through the story of yours. Like there is hardship, but there is God's goodness and what you said, his fingerprints that have been so evident on your life. If people wanted to get connected to you, what is the best way that they can do that? I am an Instagram girl. So if you just shoot me a message on DM, I will be happy to respond. Anna, thank you so much for joining us on the Parable Podcast. Thank you. What a story, right? I loved Anna's authenticity and willingness to share the hard parts of her story with us. We have one more episode next week with Shaquan in our collaboration with the Baton Pass. And also, please come out and join us at Illuminate when light reveals in Arizona, Chicago, and Central Illinois. Grab your tickets today. Here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Anna. Number 1, what is happening right now in your life that you need to pause and allow yourself to seek God and trust in his timing? Number 2, how have you seen God showcase himself through the people in your life?
If you are looking for more information on the Baton Pass or to hear more stories from some of the women, we have a whole playlist and contact information available in the show notes today, as well as Anna's information too. Also, we couldn't forget my husband, Eric, for his masterful editing skills on this episode. That's going to do it for today. I am grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable showcases how God illuminates, how he uses community to grow our stories. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.